Jan Rutherford has more than 25 years of business experience and has held executive roles in business development, marketing, sales, training, product management, and as a CEO. Jan entered the U.S. Army at age 17, weighing only 114 pounds, where he spent 6 years in Special Forces as a medic and an A-Team executive officer, and 3 years as a military intelligence officer. In 2011, Jan founded Self-Reliant Leadership LLC. It's a leadership development firm focused on helping leaders and teams develop self-reliance to create powerful results through executive workshops, custom programs, coaching, and wilderness expeditions. As a senior instructor at the University of Colorado Denver Business School for more than a decade, Jan teaches leadership in new ventures to MBA students and Doctor of Nursing practice candidates. He also teaches leadership and entrepreneurship in Ireland each summer. As a professional speaker, Jan presents the self-reliant leadership principles contained in his book, The Littlest Green Beret, on self-reliant leadership to leaders across the U.S. and Europe. Soundview is very pleased to welcome Jan Rutherford. Jan, welcome to Soundview Live.
Thanks, Andrew. I very much appreciate the introduction. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good Friday to some of you in parts of Australia, I guess. I'm really thrilled to be with you today and talk about self-reliant leadership. And my job today is really to get you to think about your approach to leadership long after this webinar is over. At Self-Reliant Leadership, we work with people who truly have heroic aspirations and believe the best way to grow an organization is by developing their people. And when I say heroic, I'm really speaking to courage. And when I say aspirations, I'm speaking to the right ambition. When I say believe, I'm speaking to character. And when I say grow, I'm speaking to, of course, performance and results. And developing speaks to leaders of character who really are resourceful and collaborative and focused. So I know the people you lead will thank you for investing your time today in your own professional development, and that's what self-reliant leadership is really all about. So we know today that we live in a world where teams are blended and matrixed and virtual and a little bit of crazy. But the way that we lead organizations still has a very high degree of command and control. I often say that Napoleon himself would recognize the hierarchy and the bureaucracy that exists in most organizations today, yet you look how work gets done, you look how we interact from a social media perspective, you look at how things get done in this world, and there's a lot that we can do to improve the way we lead and manage and inspire people. And what I would say at the very beginning to kick this off is nothing great happens in your comfort zone. I saw a picture recently that showed a small circle that showed comfort zone, and then it showed a big circle that showed where magic happens. And the whole idea is you've got to move away from that comfort zone. And what that involves is taking risks and being vulnerable and putting yourself out there. And that's why I say what heroic aspirations could truly be realized if your team approached things with courage and resourcefulness, and truly worked collaboratively, and were focused on a common inspired purpose. So what I'd ask you to do starting right now, as Andrew had mentioned, is start sending in your questions so that we can answer those toward the end. And I'm also monitoring Twitter at the hashtag self-reliant leadership. You also see on there at Jan Rutherford, that's my Twitter handle, and at Business Book is Soundview Executive Book Summaries. So if you are somebody that likes to tweet, feel free. And if I'm not able to answer those in live time, I'll get back to those later today. So the first thing I really wanted to talk about, you see a gentleman there pointing, and that's in Moab, Utah. And they were literally talking about leadership, when I snapped that photo. And it makes me think about one of the best leaders that I ever had. It was a guy named Tim Cole out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And he and I were in Orlando, and we walked into a Dunkin' Donuts, and I was a brand new manager, and I was getting ready to promote someone. And 3 hours after we walked into this Dunkin' Donuts, we walked out, and Tim just almost dropped to the ground. He's like, "Oh my God, I'm exhausted." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "Do you know what just happened in there?" I said, "Well, we talked about whether we were going to promote someone, and we decided not to." And he goes, "Exactly. Now let's really dissect what happened." And what he went on to say is, we had all kinds of things planned for that morning, and that was thrown out the window. What Tim decided to do right then and there was invest time in me. He realized I was going to promote someone that should not have been promoted. And instead of telling me to not promote him, which I would have done, I would have been compliant and said, "Great point, Tim. I'm not going to promote this guy." What he did instead was he asked me questions, not in a manipulative way and not in a way that made me feel comfortable, that made me explore deeper and ask the questions I should have been asking myself. So instead of basically handing me a fish, he taught me how to fish. And he invested a lot of time. And I often ask leaders, are you investing that kind of time in your people? Or are you putting a finger up when somebody walks in your office and saying, "Just a minute, let me finish this email"? What is your job at the end of the day? Is it really to develop people, or is it to basically get things done? And it's a little bit of both, of course. So there's a lot of definitions of leadership out there. James Clausen at the Darden School of Business in Virginia said leadership is the ability and the willingness to influence others so they can respond willingly. Peter Drucker, the famous Peter Drucker, said the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. And my favorite is John Maxwell. He said leadership is influence, nothing less, nothing more. And we know from the great philosophers of ancient times, Confucius, Aristotle, Aquinas, with the Bushido Samurai Code, Bhagavad Gita, that they really all had 6 core virtues. We would call them character traits. In organizations, we might call those core competencies, behavior traits. But they often get ignored, and they're real simple and at the same time difficult. And those 6 are courage, wisdom and knowledge, justice or fair-mindedness, humanity, what I would say is really translated into generosity, temperance, a factor of discipline, and transcendence, which I really see as purposefulness. And there isn't much talk these days about character's place in leadership. So let's really look at this. I've got 3 pillars up there: self, others, organization, and that's really what self-reliant leadership is built on. And there's no killer app, there's no paint by numbers, there's no secret to this whole thing called leadership. In fact, there's a guy named Bill George who wrote a book on authentic leadership many of you might have heard of. He looked at 125 leaders from age 23 to 93, no fewer than 15 per decade. Half of the people he interviewed were CEOs. He also looked at 1,000 studies, analyzing 3,000 pages of transcripts. And he was looking for the trait or the universal characteristic or the skill or the style that led those people to their success. And to many people's surprise, he didn't find one. Rather, the leadership that they demonstrated emerged from their life stories. Consciously and subconsciously, they were constantly testing themselves through real-world experiences and reframing their life stories to understand who they were at their core. In doing so, he discovered the purpose of their leadership and learned that being authentic is what truly made them effective. And at the end of the day, his conclusion was these people were committed to developing themselves because they realized that it wasn't about them. At the end of the day, it was about serving other people. So when we look at the objectives of this webinar today, it was really to come away with answers to the questions of, what's your tolerance for adversity and uncertainty? Do you reinforce the innate courage within your team to nurture innovation and resourcefulness? How do you guide people to the source of their own power? And are you clear about the expectations? And how can solitude and introspection focus your own energy to produce the greatest impact? And do you foster a culture of discipline? I think answering these questions is what really creates a workable plan to embrace adversity, strengthen the leader-teacher role, and leverage the introspection. So this whole idea of adversity I wanted to talk about because I think it's a tool for positive change. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story. Andrew said I went through Special Forces weighing 114 pounds, which is true. But before I got into Special Forces, I actually weighed 101 pounds as a senior in high school. And because I was so small in high school, I wasn't able to play the one sport I loved, which was football. The physics just don't work. Instead, I was a drummer, and I was a pretty good musician, and I was focused on that, and I thought I wanted to major in music. So I got accepted into the University of Florida band, but we didn't have money, and I didn't earn a scholarship. So I did something nobody did post-Vietnam. I went to an Army recruiter in Miami. And, I took the test, and I scored high, and the recruiter said, "Oh, my God, you can do any job you want in the Army." And he goes, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be in the band." And they kind of looked at each other and laughed and thought, who wants to be in the band? But they said, "Great, we'll put you on a plane and fly you to Atlanta, Georgia, and you can try out." So I got on the first plane ride of my life, went up to Atlanta, auditioned, and on the way back, had the one and only epiphany I've ever really had in my life. I decided that I was a good drummer, but I wasn't a talented musician. I would probably have a good time for 3 years, but I just had this feeling I wasn't going to be able to make a livelihood out of it. So when I got off the plane, the recruiter looked at me and he had his thumbs up, like, "Are we good?" And because he had a quota. And I shook my head and I said, "Sergeant Fleener, I'm not going to do it." And his shoulders just fell and he goes, "Oh." And I said, "But I decided on the plane ride back that I really did want to join the Army. I want to jump out of planes and be the best medic in the Army because my alternative in music was always an interest in healthcare." And he said, "Well, great. You need to go Special Forces. Those are the best medics in the Army." And I said, "Well, Sergeant Fleener, I don't want to be in Special Forces. I don't want to be a military policeman." And he said, "No, you've got it all wrong. That's not the military police. Special Forces is the Green Berets." And I thought, the Green Berets? And he handed me this brochure, and I opened it up, and I saw people that did not look like me. Literally, I was 101 pounds. And Sergeant Fleener said, "You can do this." And I believed him. And after I said I believed him and I wanted to sign up, he said, "But there's one problem. You weigh 101 pounds. You have to weigh 103 pounds and get a doctor's waiver. Otherwise, when you jump out of airplanes, you're actually going to hit the side of it." So I started drinking Joe Weider weight gain and working out and doing all these things because I had a lot of people telling me I wouldn't be able to make it. My dad bet me $10,000, which he still owes me. Says I'll never die broke. There's a lot of people, including drill sergeants, who said, "You're crazy. The rucksack, the backpack that's going to be on your back will weigh more than you," which it did. But what I found as I went through the course was there's a lot of guys that looked like the guys on the right side of the screen that were falling out, that were quitting. And I was thinking, why? This doesn't make any sense. I'm little. I'm not supposed to be hanging in there. And all these other people are falling out. What is going on? And in my mind, my 17-year-old mind, I thought, well, I must just want it worse than they do. And I was motivated by what it would feel like at the end, and I was motivated to prove a lot of people wrong. But what I realized as what I went through was there was something about adversity. There was something about being cold, wet, tired, and hungry that revealed character. Good traits in people and bad traits. So on the next screen are a few pictures after I got through all the training, and I don't know if you can recognize me in that group photo. I'm definitely not the tall guy there. So I got through, and it was a great feeling. And over a course of time, I started thinking about, why did I make it through? What happened out there? And one of the things that they would do is we would go out on a rucksack march for 4 miles with 50 pounds, in a very fast pace. And we would come into the compound, the lights would be on, it would be dark, and we'd think, oh, we're done. And we would go right out the other side of the gate. And we didn't know if we're going for 400 yards or 4 more miles. We just had no idea when the suffering would end. And what I realized was that the people that hung in there realized the suffering was temporary and limited and external. And the people that didn't looked at it as permanent and pervasive and personal. If you look at those two descriptions, the top is really the description of an optimist, and the bottom is the description of a pessimist. And as leaders, it really is about conveying hope and optimism and, a bright future. That's what, when we talk about vision, that's what it's all about. And there's a fellow named Paul Stoltz that did some work on this called adversity quotient. And he found that the extent to which someone perceives they can influence whatever happens next is a sense of control. The likelihood that someone will actually do something to improve the situation, regardless of their formal responsibilities, is a sense of ownership. And the extent to which someone perceives an adversity will reach into and affect other aspects of the situation or beyond is about reach. And the last one was the length of time an individual perceives the situation, the adversity, the crisis will last, is a measure of endurance. And there's a ball bearing in the middle of that photo, and the reason it's there is the drill sergeants that were on the marches with us would tell us, pinpoint your pain. If your shins are hurting, pinpoint it into the smallest possible ball bearing you could, draw it up right in front of your face, and while you're marching, just play with that pain. Pain is your friend. Pain is weakness leaving your body, and all these things. Now, I was only able to do that, really have that transcendental experience a couple times. Most of the time, I was literally blood, sweat, and tears. But it was interesting that, these rough sergeants really understood that you were in control of what happened between your ears. And, that the body wasn't really the key component. It was really about your head. And now, when you think about the business world, there is always a crisis. There's no such thing as stasis and stability these days. There is always something. There's always something happening externally with clients and partners in the market, and there's always things happening internally with people not necessarily getting along as well as they should. We know that. So I found this quote a few years after I went through the course, and I've kept it in my wallet ever since. And it's, he who knows how to suffer everything can dare everything. And when you read it, you think it really is talking about physical, but it's not. It's really talking about taking risks. And you think about that in the business world. The people that are bold, the people that take risks, the people that have confidence are the people that lead, the people that make things happen, the people that make a difference. And so I've always tried to remind myself, he who knows how to suffer everything can truly dare everything. So that led really to looking at, the traits of people. So when I look at self, what we know today is that none of us have enough time, resources, money, capital. That is absolutely the thing we're in short supply of. And that's nothing new. There's always going to be scarcity. And I started looking at the people that were the most resourceful and the most resilient, and I found that they really had this polarity. They had a balance of courage and vigilance. And think about, so I say the word courage and vigilance. I want you to think about, how would you describe those from a core competency perspective in your organization? How would you interview for these traits? How would you reinforce these traits in a performance review? And are they appropriate words? Courage and vigilance. So courage is being audacious and acting in the face of fear, but applied at the wrong time can be seen as insensitive, uninformed, and taking unnecessary risks. Vigilance can be sustained concentration, but it can also be analysis paralysis. Being so careful not to be bold when required. So the sweet spot really between courage and vigilance is where adversity is embraced, uncertainty is expected, creativity is fueled, passions are pursued, and heroes emerge. And what I would ask you to think about is, are there consequences in your organization for good behavior, the traits you want, the traits you admire? Are there consequences for not meeting expectations? And I don't necessarily mean a performance improvement plan. It could be as simple as saying, hey, I'm disappointed. You let the team down. Are you having those? Do you have the courage to have those difficult conversations? Most of you probably know about the Gallup 12, the employee engagement survey, 12 questions. And what's interesting about it is 6 of those questions really have to do with what we're talking about praise and recognition. The first question is, in the last 7 days, have you received praise or recognition? Okay, once a week, praise and recognition. A lot of people say, why should I tell people they're doing a good job if they're doing their job? Well, it's human nature. We need to hear it. In the last 6 months, has someone at work talked to you about your progress? In the last year, have you had the opportunity to learn and grow? The other 3 are, I know it's expected of me. Someone encourages my development. Someone truly cares about me as a person. 6 of those 12 things that demonstrate employee engagement and commitment cost no money to the organization. None. 0. So give that some thought. The second thing I wanted to talk about was egos. So I did a keynote recently for a Women's Success Forum, and in preparation for that, I interviewed 17 women that were from all 4 generations in the workforce, from a 3-star general to a millennial manager. And I asked them about the traits they thought were most important for business leaders today. And my favorite one was mentioned only by one person. It was grace. It was grace. But the most popular thing that was mentioned was the word humility. And that's what these women leaders felt was missing in the world today, and what they thought was most important. Now, I haven't had the opportunity to interview 17 men, but I don't know if that would be the most popular trait I would hear. I don't know. So let's look at that. When we talk about others, that second pillar. In the CEO groups I lead and facilitate, and the people I interact with, the biggest problem that people are facing today are all about what I would call human capital. You know, they're saying, how do I drive the vision forward? How do I communicate better? How do I lead the next generation of talent? How do I get my team to be more innovative? I want people to know they can fail, but they haven't translated that into the competencies. They don't necessarily really understand their organization's values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations. So when you look at trying to create a very collaborative organization in a culture and teams, it really is a combination of humility and confidence. And humble leaders tend to be modest and respectful and open-minded, but too much humility can make someone seem weak and indecisive. On the other hand, confidence is being self-assured in a way that inspires hope and the ability to act, but too much confidence can be perceived as dogmatism and inflexibility and even arrogance. So the sweet spot is really between the two. And some of you might know about a year ago in The Atlantic, there was a seminal article that was produced by Katty Kay and Claire Shipman called The Confidence Gap. And what they found was the evidence showed that women are less self-assured than men, and that to succeed, confidence matters as much as competence. In other words, what they found, their research was that a lot of men would say, I only meet 2 of the criteria for this position out of 10, but I can do it, and they would apply. Whereas women would say, I need to meet 8 of the 10 criteria before I have the confidence to apply. Now, in my own personal experience, I haven't seen this specific to gender. I've seen that in a number of men. In fact, I was with a CEO earlier this week who has a team of 8 people running about a $250 million company, and said the single trait he wants his leaders to possess the most is confidence. He said, there's no room for weakness in this organization. Very, very interesting. But keep in mind that, what we need to do is foster humility so that when setbacks occur, the entire team can collaborate and learn from that experience, because adversity is really the anvil upon which resilient virtues are forged into character traits, leadership traits, good behavior, performance and results at the end of the day. So, why is this important? And that is because people support what they help create, period. So many CEOs that I have worked with say, I just need to communicate better. My team doesn't get it. And they don't get it because they haven't been involved in it. I'd like you to write down this equation. E equals Q times A. And the E is effectiveness, the overall effectiveness, and the Q you probably can guess, and that's quality. And the A, what's the product that produces effectiveness? That A is acceptance. Think about it. If you've got the perfect plan, you as the leader, and it's a 10 out of 10, and the acceptance is 2, you've got an effectiveness of 20. Whereas if you let people put their fingerprints on your plan and maybe change it and maybe in your mind not make it perfect, let's say it's a 7, but the acceptance is 8, you've got effectiveness of 56. Now, that's not a tried and true formula, but there is a component of people supporting what they help create, and that goes back to the collaboration. And the reason that doesn't happen as much as we'd like is because a lot of times the whole concept of emotional intelligence is missed. There's a great quote here: "Mastering others is strength, mastering yourself is true power." Many of you have studied emotional intelligence and know that Dan Goleman's work basically shows 5 components. 2 of those are extremely important in what we're talking about here. One is self-awareness, the ability to know one's emotions, strengths, weaknesses, drives, values, and goals, and recognize their impact on others while using gut feeling to guide decisions. And the other part is the self-regulation, and that involves controlling or redirecting one's disruptive emotions and impulses and adapting to changing circumstances, the key being adapting and controlling. And oftentimes those are missed. And then, of course, the other 3 are social skill, empathy, and motivation. That motivation being driven for the sake of achievement. So those are all really important. And Socrates himself said, of course, know thyself. And what I found in teaching students in a 16-week course, MBA students, is what's so interesting in the first 18 weeks, it's all about them. It's this whole self-discovery, and they love it. They get to take tests, and they learn about themselves, and they find themselves fascinating because we're all egocentric. And then toward the end of the course, the last 8 weeks, as they get out and they interview leaders in the community, they start realizing this whole leadership thing is not about me at all. It's about serving others. And how do I do that? I need to be the best person I can be, but it really is about serving other people. So the last pillar is organization. And I've got a word here that kind of rankles people once in a while, and that's that word discipline. Because a lot of times it connotates rigidity and almost a military type of approach, command and control. But that's really not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the discipline to prioritize, identifying things that are taking you off track and eliminating them. What that really means is sacrifice. And as a leader, what I found was when I was successful, it was when I was most disciplined and most focused in the questions I asked of my team and the direction I provided. When I was chasing shiny new objects, 3 months down the road, the results were poor because I took my entire team off track. So disciplined leaders really seek order, control, restraint, and improvement, and don't accept mediocrity. But the inflexibility can also make a leader seem cold and detached. So there's a balance there. If you're completely disciplined, then you're not going to invite innovation. And innovative leaders are contemplative and creative and legacy-minded and out of the box, but they can also be too idealistic and not reality-based. So a lot of leaders that I speak to say, I want my organization to be more innovative. And I often ask, is it okay to fail here? And they'll say yes, and all the executives around the table will be looking like it is not okay to fail here. So leaders have to be really clear about the expectations and about what's okay to fail at. And because people are, the only way you're going to really create a culture where people develop as leaders is to let people fail. And in certain areas, it's okay to let people fail. In certain areas of healthcare, it's failure. It's not acceptable. So the leader has to be really clear about that and provide environments and growth opportunities for them to fail at things that aren't going to destroy the organization. So we're really talking about focus, and effective leaders really allow new ideas and approaches to be brought forth while inspiring others, with their discipline, sacrifice, self-control. When we talk about engagement and a committed organization, we know the latest research shows a vast majority of people aren't satisfied in their jobs. They're looking elsewhere. And there's actually a minority of people that are actively engaged in sabotaging their organization. And I often hear leaders say, I want people to put in the hours here. And I say, well, they'll put in the hours if you inspire them, if they can see their fingerprints on the strategic plan, if you allow that to happen. And again, that's about giving up some control, about delegating and being comfortable. And it's also about looking at the long term and knowing there's going to be some short-term setbacks. So at the end of the day, this whole leadership thing is nothing if not about change. Management is about doing things right, and of course leadership is about doing the right things, and doing the right things are figuring out how do you need to adapt and change based on what's going on in the market. And the number one pain I see for CEOs and leaders is they'll say, gosh, I'm just too busy. I don't have time to think. I really would like my team to step up. I need to spend more time with my family. I need to be balanced. And the pain is really time. And what it requires is that discipline to develop their people so that they can delegate and have time to do what only they can do. And that is work on strategy, work on the vision, work on developing people. So for me and for most people, that doesn't happen unless you take a step back. And one of the biggest things I do in coaching executives, the word I use the most is stop. Just stop what you're doing. Just take a step back. And trust me, 2 or 3 day weekend is not enough. You need 4 days. And that has always been my experience. You need to step back and have that time to figure out what are the right questions that you need to be asking. Self-reliant leadership is really knowing which questions to ask and have the courage to answer them and act to produce extraordinary results. It really is about being self-reliant only for the purpose of serving others. In other words, you have to be squared away so that you can take care of other people. Kind of like the analogy of the flight attendant saying, put your oxygen mask on first. You have to be squared away and then take care of other people. But the best leaders do this behind the scenes. You don't ever see them getting ready. You don't ever see all the preparation, the sacrifice, the discipline that requires them to be a selfless leader. So it really is about asking the right questions, asking and answering and acting. So the first question I have for you, and I want you to think deeply about this, is how do you show up to your team when faced with adversity and uncertainty? Is it shock and awe? Is it with hope and optimism and confidence? Because as a leader, they are looking at every twitch of your eyebrow when the stuff hits the fan, when there's a crisis. And they want to know that you're creating an environment that's safe. We're going to get through this. So it really is about you inspiring with hope and confidence and optimism. So are you investing the time to develop critical leadership traits in your people? Do you have the ability to do what Tim Cole did at Dunkin' Donuts in Orlando and take 3 hours to really help somebody develop that paid dividends for decades of their career? Or do you constantly tell people how busy you are, as if it's a badge of honor, when your job is really about developing these people? It's about getting things done through others. And can you inspire people with daring goals to stretch them more than they think they ever could? And daring is courage, and courage is risk, and risk is failing. And failing means you have to be resourceful and resilient. And are you nurturing those traits in other people? And how can solitude and introspection focus your energy to produce extraordinary results? So there's a Chinese parable called Sounds of the Forest. And it's about a king that decides he needs to turn the kingdom over to his son, who's a prince. And he sends the prince to the master. And the master sends the prince to the forest. And he says, you need to go to the forest for a year and just listen. Come back after a year and tell me what you heard. Simple enough. So the prince comes back and says to the master, I could hear the cuckoos sing, their leaves rustle, the hummingbirds hum, the crickets chirp, the grass blow, the bees buzz, and the wind whisper and holler. And the master said, you didn't get it. Go back out. The prince goes back out. I don't know how long for, but he goes back out. And he comes back, and the master says, tell me, son, what you heard. And he says, Master, when I listened most closely, I could hear the unheard. The sound of flowers opening, the sound of the sun warming the earth, the sound of grass drinking the morning dew. And the master nodded approvingly, and he said, to hear the unheard is a necessary discipline to be a good leader. For only when a leader has learned to listen closely to people's hearts, hearing their feelings uncommunicated, pains unexpressed, and complaints not spoken of, can he hope to inspire confidence in his people, understand when something is wrong, and meet the true needs of his citizens. The demise of organization comes when leaders listen only to superficial words and do not penetrate deeply into the souls of the people to hear their true opinions, feelings, and desires. So think about that, not just from, hearing the unheard as far as what's going on in your own head, but what's going on in the organization. And I'm here to tell you, it's almost impossible to hear the unheard unless you seek a little bit of solitude, whether that's in the forest or walking at a mall or whatever your passion is. You have to step back away from it and filter out that noise. So what's the most important decision you're facing, and what's keep you from making it? Remember, people support what they help create. Maybe you need help making that decision. And what's the ongoing cost of not making that decision, not having that difficult conversation? And the last question, which I think is the one that requires a mirror, is, are you easy to follow? Look in the mirror. And with a mentor, a coach, a boss, somebody that you trust, have somebody hold that mirror at a different angle. And that requires courage, it requires humility, and it requires discipline. And when you've answered these questions, act to become the leader that inspires true commitment versus mere compliance. We've got a lot of teams out there that are compliant, but that's not going to get us where we need to be if you've got heroic aspirations. So I'm going to conclude with a story of George Callahan. I'm on the left and George is on the right. This picture was taken in 2008. George was 87 years old. And in my hand is the beret I earned, and in George's hand is the beret that George gave me when I got mine. George was a veteran of World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and became a Green Beret at the age of 42. And it's one of the greatest honors of my life is the beret that he gave me. And when I was going in the Army, I asked George for advice when I was 17. And it was really simple. He said, you know what, Jan, when it's bad, take it day by day. And when it's really bad, hour by hour. And when it's horrible, moment by moment. You'll be fine. And you think about that pillar of self and facing adversity and courage. That's what George was talking about. And that paid dividends in my life very quickly. And he said, the second thing, and this made no sense to me as a 17-year-old, he said, you've got to get along with everybody. You're going to have to work with everybody. Not everybody's going to be your friend. Choose your friends carefully. And I thought that made no sense. And now when I talk about the pillar of others, that wisdom makes a lot of sense. Well, right after this picture was taken, my son, who was graduating high school and heading off to West Point, pulled George aside, and my son came up to me at dinner and said, "Dad, I talked to George, and he gave me some great advice." And I said, "Let me guess." And it was the exact same advice he'd given me, 30 years prior. And that served my son well. And my son said, "Hey, Dad, George is going to be there when I graduate from West Point in 2012. And I said, "Kevin, George is 87, right?" He goes, "Dad, he's going to be there. He told me. He's going to mentor me and help me." Well, sure enough, George kept his word, and George was the first person to salute my son when he was commissioned. And the Army did a big story on George because he had been in 3 wars and he'd never been to West Point. And they asked George, "What did this mean to you, this whole experience at West Point and mentoring this young man?" And George said, "It was the apex of his life." And it wasn't about the military and being a warrior, but what he saw in my son was the leadership traits that George professed were going to live on through my son and the people he would lead, the men he would lead in dangerous situations. And when my son had been a platoon leader for a while, I asked him, "So you're 23 years old. What wisdom would you have for the cadets back at West Point now that you've, commanded 45 men for a year, people that have been in combat?" And he goes, "Oh, Dad, that's easy. To be a good leader, you need to be a really good listener. You need to care about your people." This is coming from a 23-year-old in the military, and he's basically saying you have to care about your people and you have to be a really good listener. Not what you would typically expect. And that really speaks to that third pillar about the organization and introspection and how you create the culture that really drives things forward. Because at the end of the day, this whole thing of leadership is about a force multiplier. The crest in the upper right is from Special Forces. It says in Latin, "De oppresso libera," which means to free the oppressed. The Green Berets are really about being military advisors. They're about being force multipliers and training other people. And in essence, that's what we're all about in the business world as leaders. So that's where I would leave it with you guys. That decisions really determine destiny, and I would also encourage you to develop that self-reliance in yourself and others. There's a manifesto that I wrote based on the principles here that just was finished last week, and if you're interested, you can contact me at any of those numbers below. There's also some videos on self-reliantleadership.com where you can see where the Green Beret Foundation did a 5-minute documentary on me and see me speaking, and there's a number of resources. And with that, what I would remind you is that self-reliant leadership really is about knowing which questions to ask and having the courage to answer them and act. And with that, Andrew, I'll be glad to take any questions that have come in from the group.
Absolutely. And if you have questions for Jan Rutherford, you can ask them by using that chat function on your player down in the lower left corner. Type your question into the box and click send to send it to us. Jan, one thing I wanted to bring up first, just from a contact standpoint, the Jan at self-reliantleadership.com address, people have asked about the survey that you spoke of. Can they email you there or go to the site to find it?
The survey of the women that I interviewed, is that what you're talking about?
Someone mentioned the PER survey.
The PER survey. I'm not sure what they're referring to. If they can send me an email, I would be glad to address that question. Okay,
I'll have them do that. Anyone who has questions for Jan regarding the survey or any other parts of his research, you can obviously contact him at Jan at self-reliantleadership.com. Let's go into the questions now. First one that I have, someone had asked, how do we better help employees align their professional development goals with the goals of the organization?
That's a great question, and where I start with that is really at the shared values perspective. I mean, it's interesting when we ask people, what are your values? People always say, well, integrity. Well, okay, that's a given. But what do you value in the organization? What do you value in the people that you work with? And it could be responsiveness, or simply people do what they say they're going to do, that they're predictable, that I can count on them, that there's a work ethic. I mean, there's different things. So to me, you really start with, what are the values that I have? What are the values of the organization? And the values of the organization might be something that's on paper and stated in values and mission and vision. But the real values of the organization are expressed by who gets promoted and who gets fired. Because really when we promote people, we're saying this person has the traits, has the values, has the skills that we appreciate. And when someone is let go, we're basically saying they don't fit. So I think it's important to pay attention to those. I think it's also important to know thyself, know what your strengths are, and make sure that you're putting yourself in an environment where your values really are aligned and in roles where you are able to use your strengths. And it kind of goes back to what Bill George said about, the most effective leaders are people that are authentic. And if you can't be authentic, you're not going to be effective. If you're in an organization where you're getting feedback where people are telling you to be something you're not, it's going to be a tough road. But the true leaders, as Bill George's research pointed out, are people that are constantly testing themselves, which means they're failing, and they're reframing their life story. They're always testing themselves. And I find that, that is the reason I'm so interested in leadership is, from a success perspective. I'm just curious about what makes people so effective, what makes people givers, net givers in society. The most successful people are the busiest people, the people that are doing a lot for their community and giving and putting themselves in situations where the gifts that they possess can be, leveraged in the service of other people.
Next question concerns connection between courage and vigilance as it pertains to creativity. Someone ask, can you explain how courage and vigilance can be a source for creativity?
Well, what I had when I talked about courage and vigilance, I was really talking about being resourceful, which I think is a way to be creative. But I really think courage is being bold, taking risks, doing things that are innovative, perhaps creative. The vigilance is making sure that it's tempered, that you're making good decisions. What I think is really interesting is along in a career path, what gets you promoted to a certain position isn't necessarily the skills that you need to be successful in that position. So if you're a manager and you want to be a director, you've got to do certain things. But then as you become a director and you're managing other managers, there's a different skill set. The same at the VP level, the same at the executive level. And again, I think it is tempering and knowing all my strengths are really great, but applied in the wrong place at the wrong time, they can be derailers. So I've got to have a good sense of self. I've got to have a good mirror. I've got to have mentors or coaches or somebody around me to help me, whether I'm using 360-degree feedback or whatever. I think those are important aspects going forward. And again, any organization out there really needs to be innovative and be able to adapt to the market. And it really does take a certain amount of courage to do that. And if you will, permission from the leadership of the organization that it's okay to try things.
Jen, you touched on a couple things there that I think we need to explore in more detail, because some of the questions we've received, they fit in with part of your response to that last question, starting with the people around you. First question along those lines came from a listener who asked, are there techniques during the hiring process to help ensure that we have a team with whom we as leaders will fit?
Yeah. Well, there's a book I recommend called Top Grading. and I don't recall the author offhand, but it really is about behavioral based. It is looking at each individual role and coming up with competencies, and then looking at the organization and saying, there might be 10 competencies that everybody in any role regardless needs in this organization, basically shared values, and there are specific competencies for this position. And figuring out how to, if I ask somebody what they're going to do, I don't think that's a good interview question. If I ask about a situation that they did in the past and really dig down and explore, tell me about that. Tell me about a time that you took a chance in an organization, stuck your neck out. How'd you approach that? Did you present the pros and cons of 5 different options and then a recommendation? What happened when you failed? How'd you react? How did your peers react? But it's really getting to those stories. I mean, it's important to kind of hear the stories, not just do a police interrogation Q&A back and forth. You've got to understand the stories, because that's where people will reveal their character and what they're all about. And I'm speaking for myself, I want to be around people, that truly have ambitions beyond power and money, that are think about others, and that know that a key component of any effective team, organization, even a nonprofit, is developing other people. That's a really important aspect of how they define success.
Jan, I'll tell you what, you mentioned Top Grading as a book that you rely on. That's the book by Bradford D. Smart, Dr. Bradford D. Smart. Salvia's actually covered that book in the past, so I think what we'll do, we'll include a PDF copy of that for everyone who's on the webinar with us today. They'll get a copy of that in the follow-up email, so that they'll be able to take a look at Salvia's summary of Top Grading and can get a little bit more information as it pertains to that last question. Okay, great. So moving forward, once you have the right people in place within your organization, someone asked, how do you as a leader develop your existing team members into tomorrow's leaders? Are there specific tasks that you can use or tests you can have to help them develop?
Well, I mean, one thing you have to remember is part of self-reliant leadership is that the development is up to you as an individual. I mean, hopefully that individual is in an organization that supports that and can provide resources. But the development is up to the individual, first and foremost. And one of the reasons that I created this organization is I felt like with my students, after 16 weeks, I was dumping them off a cliff and sending them out to middle management saying, be good leaders. And what I talked about a lot about journaling. I talked about using, that's the introspection part. I talked a lot about, hey, you're going to face a crisis every day. There's something that's going to happen. You can learn from it. It's going to stink when it happens and you're going to beat yourself up. But after you beat yourself up, what'd you learn from it? If it happens to your team, can you help that team learn from it? And then the other one, they often say the only way we're going to be different tomorrow than today is the books we read and the people we meet. Well, we're around people every single day, good and bad, effective and ineffective, that we can learn from and study and pay attention in a room and group dynamics. But part of that is really what the leaders have to do is take time to develop their people. There's 3 universal questions we always ask about each other, but not out loud. Do you care about me as a person? Can I trust you? And are you committed to my success? And we answer those by doing what's right, doing our best, and treating others as we'd like to be treated. Really simple. As I said at the very beginning, there's no magic formula. There's no color-coded handout that makes somebody an effective leader. It's hard work. Somebody asked me recently, is it even possible for somebody to be selfless? Isn't human nature for us all to be selfish? The marketing research seems to support that. And I said, well, that might be the case, but the best leaders, I think, are in pursuit of those virtues. They're in pursuit of being as selfless as they can be, having wisdom and being purposeful.
All right, let's take one more question I think we have time for. One of the brought up was about enabling people with stretch goals or stretching themselves, someone had asked, how do we ensure that when we challenge people with these stretch goals, we're not actually causing them to crash and burn?
Well, I go back to people support what they help create. So, part of effective coaching is really brainstorming, getting people to come up with ideas. And there's times for directing and delegating and supporting and coaching. But the more that we can get people involved in that, and they say, you know what, I can do this, or they say, I'd like to do X, and you say, I think you can do Y. Let's see if we can get you there. I asked a group recently, so, if you were a coach of a football team and someone missed a field goal, what would you say to the kicker coming off the field? What would a good coach say? Well, I had a lot of different responses. Some people would say, you're going to have to kick a lot more balls come Monday morning. And somebody would say, well, I better get the defense out there and do their job. Another person said, well, a good coach would say, hey, next time. The guy's already down. You don't need to, excuse the pun, kick him while he's down. But I really do think it's a matter of taking time. One of the biggest things that I disliked when I was CEO was spending time with people kind of checking on where they're at with projects, and like with a pen in hand going, where are you at with this and this and this and this? That's management. That's micromanagement. What I'd really love to do was to develop people. Where are you at? What's holding you back? What decisions have you made in the past month you wish you could get back? What decisions do you have that you're facing? What are you doing from a professional development perspective? Those are the things that I wanted to spend time on because I know those were really good long-term investments.
Well, everyone can contact Jan Rutherford by visiting him at self-reliantleadership.com. You can also email him at jan@self-reliantleadership.com. His phone number is also provided there on the screen for you. Jan, thank you again so much for being with us today on the program.
Oh, it's my honor. Thank you.
Thank you to Jan Rutherford for joining us today on Soundview Live. Thank you, as always, to Ursula Sharp, the executive producer of our program. Soundview Live is copyrighted 2015 to Soundview, Inc. For Soundview Executive Book Summaries, this is Andrew Clancy. Thank you. Have a great day.